Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone to Friday Night Live. It's the 76th episode. We are honored tonight. We have special guests that will be joining us. Mufti Abdul Wahab will be my co-host. And we've been eagerly waiting for our teacher, mentor, scholar of our country, of alhamdulillah, the Ummah. He'll be joining us tonight, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, the co-founder of Zaytuna and the president of Zaytuna. Hafidahullah, may Allah protect him, prolong his life, and it gave him so much more time in his space to contribute to the society from his writings, from his speeches, from his work, from his presence. And honestly, we, as an American society, we have not valued our scholars, especially the elders of our community. So we're so fortunate. I typically am never nervous speaking in front of or being with another scholar but Sheikh Hamza, he's like an elder to us, and I've already apologized to him before we even start if I say anything disrespectful. And I want to apologize to the audience that's going to be watching. Inshallah, may Allah give us the ability to value our ulama. Sheikh Abdul Wahab will be joining us. Before we start, I'm going to have Hafiz Nurul Huda, one of our students who is finishing his alim program in Chicago. And inshallah, he'll be joining us for a beautiful recitation. And then we'll have a beautiful panel, a reminder discussion with our great scholar, Sheikh Hamza, and Mufti Abdul Wahab will be also a co-host. So please welcome our Qari, our Hafiz Nurul Huda.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa salam, Nur, kayfa hal? How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, good. How are you doing, Sheikh?
Alhamdulillah, good to see you. At least we're seeing you on camera. Bismillah, go ahead. We're not going to hold you back.
طيب, jazakumullah khair. Good to see you all too. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم تر أن الله أنزل من السماء ماء فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلفا ألوانها ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء إن الله عزيز غفور إن الذين يتلون كتاب الله وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية يرجون تجارة لن تبور ليوفيهم أجورهم ويزيدهم من فضله إنه غفور شكور والذي أوحينا إليك من الكتاب هو الحق مصدقا لما بين يديه إن الله بعباده لخبير بصير ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا فمنهم ظالم لنفسه ومنهم مقتصد ومنهم سابق بالخيرات بإذن الله ذلك هو الفضل الكبير جنات عدن يدخلونها يحلون فيها من أساور من ذهب ولؤلؤا ولباسهم فيها حرير وقالوا الحمد لله الذي أذهب عنا الحزن إن ربنا لغفور شكور الذي أحلنا دار المقامة من فضله لا يمسنا فيها نصب ولا يمسنا فيها لغوب صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah. Qari Noor, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for the beautiful recitation. This part, and every time you recite this beautiful part of the Quran, it really melts our heart. And we miss you so much here in Michigan. Inshallah, you are doing well in your studies. And may Allah put barakah in everything you're doing.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu
Keep
alaikum.
it going. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm going to invite Mufti Abdul Wahab on. And welcome, Mufti Abdul Wahab.
Assalamu alaikum, Bajan.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, Bajan. I'm not sure who's excited, the audience or me. That's the only problem right now.
I think it's going to be so unfair. Both of us are very excited. We're here to learn from Sheikh Hamza. And we read his work. We listen to his teachings. And America overall is very lucky to have a scholar to speak in the language that they can understand. And the West is very lucky. We're fortunate. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to value our time in the virtual company of scholars. So Mufti Wahab, please welcome Sheikh Hamza for us.
Bajan, I think, it goes without saying that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf does not need an introduction. But for the sake of the session, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is all of our teacher. He's had a direct and indirect hand in Miftah, in the work that's happening here in Michigan and majority of institutions all across North America. And he obviously is the president of Zaytuna, co-founder. It's his brainchild. And I don't want to take too much time, Bajan. He's waiting there. And I'm inshallah going to bring on Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum assalam, Sheikh Hamza.
Alhamdulillah.
How are you, Sheikh? How's your health?
Yeah, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Trying days for everybody, but alhamdulillah, I have nothing to complain about. Alhamdulillah. Nahmadullah wa nashkuru. Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh, we are very excited, and we can't hide our excitement for you being on our program tonight.
Allah yubarak feekum, inshallah. Allahumma ij'alni khayran mimma yadhunnun.
Ameen, all of us. And may Allah keep you young and healthy. And in the books that you've done, and the books that you're writing, the articles that you published and continue to publish, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your fingers, bless your heart, and bless the eyes and the ears that listen and read your work. So Mufti Wahab, Sheikh Hamza, I don't know how many programs you come on for other institutions the last year. I know you came on for Imran Khan recently, a few months back, but between this and now, have you been on any other virtual programs? Because you're very busy.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't do a lot of, I don't do that much online anymore.
Sheikh, it's an honor to be the fact that you took out time for us. It's amazing.
Allah yubarak feek. No, it's, look, everybody has areas of concern, and it's part of what makes the world extraordinary, is that people sorry, let me turn this off. That people in the sa'ikum la shatta, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that humanity, all of their endeavors are diverse, and that's part of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you need all these different people to be engaged in different things. But arguably, the most important of all things is education. And so I will always, when educational institutions contact me, even from outside of our faith, I'm very concerned about education, because with education, there's a possibility of transformation. And without it, there's an inevitability of jahiliyyah, of just the opposite of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for us in creating us, because we were intended to know him. You know, as Ibn Abbas said, مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. He said, إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ, you know, to know him. And ma'rifah comes with education, both outward and inward education. And so what you're doing is extremely important. It's a very difficult endeavor. It's a mysterious component of our species, because there's so many different views about education, about what it is, about what its purpose is, about what the best ways to go about it. There's a lot of different educational theories, and so it can be very confusing. But what we do know is that our species has produced extraordinary works, and these are the great works that our different civilizations have produced. So if you look at the Asian civilizations, they have extraordinary works, and I have a lot of books from that civilization that I benefited from. Right now, I've been rereading Musashi Miyamoto's The Book of Five Rings, which is an amazing book on martial arts, but it's very applicable to the world in general. And
just to cut you off, I hope you don't start fighting into martial arts, because we don't want to keep you on the safe side. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
And then you have the extraordinary Indic culture that produced so many wonders. Mathematics really comes from that part of the world, and it moved into the Arab world, and then our ancestors, the Muslim ancestors, gave it to the Europeans, and then they created the atomic bomb. So, you know, we in some ways we have our own civilization to blame for that, because there were a lot of scholars that said, don't teach them math. I mean, we actually had the ulama said, the Christians come down to learn from us. We shouldn't teach them, you know, because they're not going to use it for good things.
What was that in Greece? That was something similar to philosophy. Like, take this knowledge, and it's whoever took this knowledge, it destroyed them. What's the background of that knowledge? Sometimes,
well, philosophy, you know, the original meaning of it is a very beautiful meaning, because it's philosophia in Greek. It's philo is love, and sophia is wisdom. Some even say sophia comes from that Greek word. I mean, that's one opinion. But it's a love of wisdom, and it came from Pythagoras, who did not want to be called a sophist, which meant wise person. You know, sophomore in our school system comes from two Greek words, moros, which is stupid, and then sophia, which is wise. So a sophomore is like a wise fool, because they're no longer a freshman, and they think they know a lot more than they do. And so there was an understanding that a little bit of learning is a dangerous thing. So Pythagoras did not want to be called wise, but he said, but I'm a lover of wisdom. So he was the first one to use that term of philosoph, you know, the lover of wisdom. In Arabic, it was termed, you know, they called it hakim, which is a beautiful word, because, as you know, I know you've all studied sarf. But in Arabic, that beautiful fa'il pattern is a active and a passive. So it's a recipient of wisdom as well as being a giver of wisdom.
Like marid, you know, samim.
Marid, yeah, same thing. So you know, philosophy is a very important aspect of education. And unfortunately, one of the problems with the Muslims is they associate philosophy with one school, which is called the peripatetic school. Imam al-Ghazali in his Tahafut al-Falasifa was only talking about one school.
Wow.
He was talking about a school that had some major problems in it because they came to conclusions through rational thought that were completely antithetical to our teaching, like the eternity of the world, that there's no resurrection of the bodies, that God doesn't know the particulars. So these things, he identified 20 problems in peripatetic philosophy, which was the Greek philosophy of Aristotle. And so, but the methodology of the philosophers was recognized to be very useful, and that's why Imam al-Ghazali incorporated it into usul al-fiqh. I mean, he is the first one to really bring the methodology of philosophy into usul al-fiqh, and that's why, as you know, there's a branch of usuli tradition that's called the usul of the mutakallimin. You know, the people it's the people that are using scholastic tradition, logic, mantiq. I mean, as you know, the Mustasfa, the first 40 pages is on logic. And I'll tell you something very interesting about Saudi Arabia. So in Saudi Arabia, you know, there were some of the ulama, because of the early positions, and because you'll read, there's a lot of early positions in our tradition that are opposed to kalam. So they say whoever learns kalam becomes a heretic. And so people think that that's the kalam of the later tradition. But it wasn't. They were talking about the Mu'tazilite school, which was heavily influenced by peripatetic philosophy. And so later they recognized, look, there's tools that we can use here. And so they incorporated those tools. So these aspects of our tradition, which a lot of people, unfortunately, because they don't know the tradition well enough, and then you have people that cherry pick. So they'll write a book against kalam, and they'll have all these scholars who are very notable scholars in our tradition that we revere, who are telling you, beware of kalam. Anybody who learns kalam goes astray, this and that. That was all true at the time they were saying it. But as time passed, these tools were incorporated into the tradition. And so the later scholars recognized the benefit of these tools. So this is really important to understand, because a lot of people don't understand that. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have today, we have an ossified tradition, and it's a problem. The tradition always needs tajdid. It needs, but it doesn't need ibtida'. It doesn't need like innovation. You know, it needs renovation, not innovation. So the innovators bring things into it that will alter it and distort it.
I think you just froze for a second.
No, I can hear Sheikh Hamza perfect.
Oh, sorry, me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Kalam, philosophy is very important. The method, and this is why Ibn Khaldun, who did not like the philosophers, if you read the Muqaddimah, he didn't like the philosophers, but he said their methodology is the soundest of research methodologies. And he was very steeped in it because the scholastic tradition adopted it as a methodology. So usul al-fiqh becomes influenced by it. The tafsir, everything is influenced by akhlaq.
Razi's work, it's just unbelievable because of that angle approach that he has. It's just
Razi is a great example. Imam Razi radiallahu anhu is a great example of somebody who really just went so deeply into that methodology that he was able to find things in the Quran that nobody before him found.
Sheikh, you mentioned something earlier about education inwardly and outwardly, right? And the need of rectification. And for us, I mean, the title of the program is The Power of Education. And how would we, as students of knowledge and as all the attendees and listeners, understand the inward education aspect and how that also is as important, if not more important, than the outward aspect of it? And perhaps you can shed some light on that as well.
Well, our tradition, Bismillah, our tradition always saw that hand in hand with ta'lim, and they might not have used this term. I mean, it was used very early on, but this idea of like tarbiyah and ta'lim together is probably a later iteration. But the idea, they understood that, and this is why they called the teacher was murabbi. So they understood that a teacher is not just simply giving data or information. A teacher is somebody who is literally nurturing a seedling, which is the potentiality in the student. Now, the student, there's something very natural in education, so that if a student is in the right soil, given the right nourishment, knowledge will naturally grow in them, because we all have the potential to know. That it's part of our nature, it's part of our fitrah. And the children are constantly asking questions when they're little, but that spirit of inquiry is very often driven out of them by drill and kill, by certain pedagogical approaches that become very deadening to the soul. And that's why it's very important for the teachers to understand the nature of children, that children are at different stages. This kind of cookie cutter approach to education is very dangerous, because some students are ready for mathematics at a very early age. Other students are not. And if the teacher doesn't recognize that, then what happens is a student will actually think they're dumb or they can't understand it. And then there's a lot, like just mathematics is a really good example of that, because there's a lot of children that get math phobia because math is introduced too early for them. And this is why in traditional education, generally math was not introduced until a child was about 10 or 11 years old. The only thing they did with math was rote memorization, but they did no abstract mathematics, because the mind is generally not ready for it. Mm-hmm. And so like in Mauritania, I'll just give you an example. In Mauritania, they don't do any math till in the traditional madrasa, the mahdara, until they're about 15.
Oh, Sheikh, I think I got the math phobia, Sheikh, because
and it's tragic, because math is so important. Yeah. And لِتَعْلَمُوا عَدَدَ السِّنِينَ وَالْحِسَابِ. You know, Allah gave us the heavens. One of the reasons for it is so that we could determine time and learn mathematics. And so math is extremely important. And your mind is divided between a qualitative aspect and quantitative. So we're in the world, which is all quantitative, but our perception of the world is qualitative. So we recognize beauty. You cannot quantify beauty. Beauty is experienced. It's a qualitative experience. You can't quantify it. You can't determine how much beauty there is in a great work of art, or on the human face, or in a Persian carpet. But you can experience it. It's qualitative. But you can measure that carpet. That Persian carpet could be measured. You can determine how much red dye was used in it. That's all quantitative. And so human beings have both elements, and a fully educated human being is somebody whose qualitative and quantitative aspects have been realized. The potentialities that inhere within the soul have been realized. And so it's very important for the teacher to understand, because a student the light bulb goes off, and you can see it in their faces when the light bulb goes off. You can see that light and it's quite stunning. And that's why it's wonderful to teach like third and fourth graders, because the intellect is just beginning to come into its maturation, and they're able to discover things and have that wonderful experience of learning something for the first time. It's quite stunning to see that. But if things are introduced too early, then the child shuts down and actually thinks that it's stupid. Brilliant people. I mean, I'll just give you an example of, it's famously noted that they literally thought that Albert Einstein was retarded, that because he was such a slow learner.
Wow.
And I'll give you an example. My own son, who when he was about, I think, 6 years old. He was in a homeschooling, but it was part of the school. We were schooling him in home, but they had a person from the state system who came and assessed. Is California. So so they called me into a meeting with my wife, and we went, and they said, your son has a learning disability. And I was like, no, he doesn't. and of course they rolled their eyes at that point. You know, I'm the parent in denial. And they said, no, we've assessed him and he's not where he should be. And I said, first of all, I'm a teacher, and I can tell you that son of mine is, of my 5 sons, he's the smartest.
SubhanAllah.
And I said, it's not that he has a learning ability, it's that he's ahead of, he's already thinking about things that are beyond what you're trying to, what you think he should be knowing now.
Wow.
I said, those things will click for him, because I know from the questions he asks me that he's thinking at another level. And they just literally thought I was crazy.
Wow.
So that child, I would not let them put him into a special, and by the way, they get money for every child they identify as a special needs child. So there's an incentive in these school districts to identify children with learning disabilities. But if you tell a child he has a learning disability, you're going to harm him psychologically. And I did not want that to happen to my son. So I totally refused. So that boy in a high school class of 300 graduated with a 4.0 straight A at a really competitive high school, all Asian and South Asian people. He got into University of Chicago. He did a degree in classics, studied Latin and Greek, and graduated with a stellar GPA from a top American university. But had I listened to them, he might have ended up thinking he was really stupid.
Unbelievable.
And so it's important that people develop at different levels. Some people have their intellectual awakening at the age of 25. So we don't know, because it's just Allah has made us all different. So some people will show great brilliance early on, and other people it's very slow development. And then the other thing we know with neuroplasticity, that the brain actually gets more intelligent. So for instance, Sayyidina Umar said, تعلم العربية فإنها تزيد العقل. It will increase intelligence by learning Arabic. And the more you learn, the more intelligent you will become. And so this idea that people are fixed in intelligence is an idea that has been refuted by modern cognitive science.
Allah bless you, Sheikh.
And then the fath is real. Like Allah is fatah, and He can open up. It's like the man that and I saw this extraordinary news about a man who was a bricklayer, and he got hit by a brick, and he became a mathematical genius. It's a true story. And he wasn't smart. He was like dumb. But he got hit on the head with a brick, and it opened something in his brain. And he's able to do really complex math.
SubhanAllah.
It's all there. It's all in us. Like our capacity is unbelievable. Human being, language, the fact that we're communicating right now, the type of syntax that we're using just to communicate is so complicated. It's so difficult that computers cannot mimic it. And these are supercomputers that have immense capacity for this kind of logarithmic type of programming, and yet they cannot imitate. The biggest difficulty they have in AI is particles and prepositions, what are called huruf al-ma'ani in Arabic, which are the most difficult thing in Arabic. to learn, because it's so nuanced. Language is very nuanced. And then idioms, what do idioms, where do they come from?
Wow.
You know, idioms are so bizarre sometimes.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, so when my brother,
Like if I ask you, how do you do? Like, what does that mean? How do you do?
we just
How do
do.
I do what? Yet it's a way of introducing.
So
How about if you say in Arabic? It makes more sense, don't you think so?
Like, how would you say it in Arabic?
Like كيف الحال?
No, how do you do is how do you do? That's an old-fashioned way of introducing yourself. How do you do?
Yeah. Sheikh, my brother always says to me,
That's from Pygmalion, from Bernard Shaw's. It's a Victorian English.
Jazakallah khair for clarifying that, Sheikh, because our faces showed that we didn't know what it was, but you clarified it for us. Jazakallah khair. But my brother always says to me, when you were younger, I dropped you on your head. So maybe that's where my fatah came from.
Yeah, no, but the fath is real. And so, listen, there are people that have, like Abduddin al-Iji is one of the smartest people in our tradition, and they thought he was not intelligent when he was young.
That really proves, Sheikh Hamza, what you're saying is people who limit themselves have greater potentials. And the aspiration of learning should never end. Never confine oneself. Like, oh, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm someone older, I can't do it. I can't memorize the Quran, so that doesn't mean I can't learn tafsir. I mean, it's possible that you can have this fatah even at an older age. I think we have Mufti Abdul Rahman.
Mufti Abdul Rahman, Sheikh Hamza, does not join Friday night. He's our elder brother, my elder brother, Sheikh Abdullah's younger brother. But because you're on, he wanted to come say salam, he wanted to join as well. And we don't see him.
Alaikum assalam.
Sheikh Abdul Rahman, it was telling me that he's a fan of your dad's poetry, and I didn't even know your dad did poetry, Sheikh Hamza.
My dad didn't do a lot of poetry, but my dad wrote a book on Darul in English. And it's very funny because he did it in a traditional, more of a Arabic style. He did a sharh of a didactic poem that was written in Elizabethan English on what they call the royal rhyme, which is the one that Shakespeare uses most. So
did you inherit that skill from your dad too? Is
poetry?
Yeah.
My dad taught me a lot about poetry.
Sheikh Hamza, there's that once lecture of yours that, I mean, when I first went to memorize Quran, I was 9 years old, and my teacher told, so my older brother is right on top of me, and he went and he was kind of forced to go to the school. So his face was all grumpy, and he had the fatah later in his life. And so my teacher looks at me, my older brother, and he tells me to read. So I'm all excited. I read. My older brother, he says read, and he doesn't want to read. So my teacher looks at both of us and he says, this younger brother of yours is going to become hafid before you, alim before you, mufti before you, get married before you, and have a kid before you. So he just had this prophecy like instantly, right? And I did become hafid alim, but he told me when we were getting married, he said, come on, man, take it easy on me. So I got married 1 week after him. Otherwise, everything else was in place. So he asked me how old was I? I was 9 years old. He says, okay, I want you to become hafid while you're 9. And he had this tactic. He would make me memorize long Persian couplets like Rumi and Saadi. And you gave a speech once, long time ago, about what is in poetry. And I'm not sure if you remember that speech. But
I do remember. Yeah, it was in Santa Clara.
I
think I was wearing a Mauritanian.
I never watched the video actually because I think I heard the audio. And as you were talking about education, there's like from that speech there was like that one thing you said a poem of Shakespeare that I memorized from that speech, and then you mentioned something about your father. Your father said that the best poem is a poem I'm reading, right? Like
about Shakespeare, he said that.
Yeah, the best poem is a poem I'm reading right now. And in that speech, you mentioned something that about education. You said something about like passion. You're like, very few people are afforded the extraordinary delight of having a great teacher. Like most of us have to suffer the mediocrity of, I think it's a passionless people teaching words that emanated from the hearts of deeply passionate people. Can you expand on that?
Well, if you look, one of the gifts of scholars, Fakhruddin al-Razi says that knowledge is something that we inherently want to share with others. And this is why a child, when they discover something new, they often run in an extraordinary ecstatic state of excitement, and they, oh, come look at what I found, and they want you to see this thing. That excitement of discovery, which in Arabic wajada, which means to discover, to find, is also means to be ecstatic. And so there's a type of ecstasy that occurs. I mean, there's a famous story about Archimedes, who discovered displacement, like why boats don't sink. And apparently he was in the bathtub when when he discovered it, because there was something in and he saw the water being displaced, and he had that, he started shouting Eureka, meaning I found it, because he obviously was working on the problem. And apparently he got up naked and just ran down the street shouting Eureka. That's the Greek story of it. Hopefully one would not do that. But that state, which is called a shabha in traditionally, is something that the Prophet ﷺ talked about finding God. And he said that Allah loves the man of Tawbah. And then he used the analogy of a man who loses his camel and despairs and thinks he's going to die. And then he finds it. And then from his ecstasy in finding his camel, he shouts, Allahumma anta abdi wa ana rabbuka. Akhta'a min shiddati farihihi. You know, he made a mistake from his ecstasy. And so what knowledge is about discovery. It's about finding new things. It's about learning new things. It's about having insights about things. And when that happens, it's quite extraordinary, because you can be thinking about something for a very long time. And then, I'll give you an example in poetry, because poetry is very interesting. So probably the most famous poem in America is two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not be one travel. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, to the end of the poem. I read a book on that poem.
Wow.
And I was so disappointed with the person's interpretation of it. And I've thought a lot about that poem. And so one day I was literally walking out in the woods, and I was thinking about that poem. And then I realized what that poem was about. I really had that
awakening
moment of realization. It was quite extraordinary, because I realized that the key to that poem is in the last stanza, where he says that two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And he repeats I twice. And what I realized was the book is about free will. That this is the gift that God's given us, that we actually can choose the two paths. Like Hadaynahu Najdain. We can, but you have to be conscious to make that choice. You have to know that it's you, that you are a moral agent, and that you have to act. And most people don't do that. They're in the default setting of just going through life without being conscious of the choices they make. And so that was my and there are other interpretations that are possible for that poem, but for me that was a very powerful moment of realizing that. Another example of that, I was walking with my son once, and I said, isn't it funny how once you start walking, you don't really think about it. You just, one foot follows the other. And so we were just thinking about walking. And then I thought, it's very interesting, the willpower. And that walking is very much related to, there's a willfulness in walking. And then I thought about like a child when they walk. It's like the first willful thing they really do.
Wow.
and they work at it so hard, and they do it before they can learn to speak.
Yep.
And so we're a walking creature. Ibadur Rahman alladhina yamshuna ala al-ardi hawna. Allah used meshi, bashar al-masha'ina bil-dhulm bin-nur al-tam yawm al-qiyamah. That meshya is a very important aspect of our being. And so I started thinking about the irada, the whole idea of will and walking. That's the first willful thing that we do. And then, so I went back and I looked up, I was looking up will. I was thinking about will, irada, arada. Well, the root word is rawada. It's rawada, right? Which is road, right? So the word road is from Arabic, probably, because in Arabic, the ra'id is the one that goes out walking in search, yarudu, rawdan. So he goes out looking for water. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, Ashabi yadkhuluna alayya ruwada. They come to me as ruwad. In other words, the Sharia is the road to water. So they come to me for the water of life, fons vitae, the water of life. And then the وَيَخْرُجُونَ أَدِلَّةً, they leave as guides.
Subhanallah.
Because the ra'id, is the one, the Prophet said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, الرَّائِدُ لَا يَكْذِبُ أَهْلَهُ. The ra'id does not lie to his people where water is, because it's a matter of life or death. And akhirah is a matter of life or death. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he is the dalil because he went and he found the water of life. God revealed to him the water of life, but he was a seeker. He was a seeker. The Prophet was a seeker. He was going to the cave of Hira. And that's why willfulness is so important. And the path, we call the path, the spiritual path, the inward tarbiyah, the inward education in our tradition was traditionally called tariqah. So you had the Sharia, which was the outward journey, and you had the tariqah, which was the inward journey. And of course, it becomes very corrupt and decadent, and you have all the problems that go with, in the same way that the outward becomes corrupt and decadent, the inward also has all those problems. But it doesn't, but that path is there. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزال أمر الأمة مستقيما حتى يأتي الله بأمره أو حتى تقوم الساعة. So Amr al-Ummati is mustaqima. It will remain there. The Amr is there until the end of time. So that path is always available. It's the irada. And that's why the murid becomes the murad. The one seeking becomes the one sought. So, and that's part of the problem with modern Sufism, is that the murid is no longer murid Allah, it's murid al-shaykh.
Wow.
And that's why there's a whole corrupt relationship between disciples and their teachers that's very unhealthy. Because a true teacher is a guide. They don't want you to become them. If they're a true teacher, they don't want you to become like them. They don't want you to imitate them. They don't, and it's very often students want to do that. They want to dress like their sheikh. They want to, but these are temptations that have to be resisted.
Wow.
Because you cannot lose yourself. It's very important that one of the most beautiful things about the Prophet's companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is they're all unique individuals. They're not cookie cutter people. They're completely unique, amazing, fully developed human beings. Abu Bakr is not Umar. Umar is not Abu Dhar. Khadija is not Aisha. Aisha is not Hafsa. They're really amazingly unique people, despite the fact they were all imitating the same man, but that's his vastness. Because he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he contains multitudes. When he made Hajj, he made Hajj al-Ifrad, he made Hajj al-Qiran, he made Hajj al-Tamattu' in the same Hajj.
Subhanallah.
Hamza, in that lecture that you gave, you mentioned this poem of Shakespeare. I mean, it's just my curiosity. I'm coming here as a student right now. You mentioned it's like, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The expense of spirit in a waste of
shame is lust, in action
until
lust.
action
Yeah.
lust is perjured, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust. Enjoyed no sooner, but despised straight. Past reason hunted, and no sooner had. Past reason hated, as is swallowed bait. On purpose laid to make the taker mad.
Mad in
Not in
pursuit.
pursuit in possession so. Had, having, in quest to have, extreme. A bliss in proof and proved, a very woe. Before a joy proposed, behind a dream. And the last two lines, all this world well knows, yet none knows well.
To shun the heaven, leads to this hell.
To shun the heaven leads men to this hell. Can you mention a hadith about that? Can you mention that? It was a beautiful. You said
before you guys mention the hadith, I think we need a sharah of this poem a little bit.
Well, I mean, he's talking about the state of lust, and even when he begins at the expense of spirit. So spirit is, Shakespeare loved puns. So there's a double entendre, because spirit means ruh, but it also meant semen, because they believed in this idea of the homunculus, that there was the little human was contained in the semen. Mm-hmm. So the expense of spirits is wasting your semen in lust. So it's the idea is that a human being in a state of lust is, they've lost their minds.
Wow.
And then they'll do crazy things in that state. I mean, the date rape is a major problem in American universities, and date rape usually occurs when the couple gets into what they call heavy petting, where they're, and so men, once they're in that state, they're no longer in a kind of rational mode. They're in more of a, Imam Shafi'i famously said that all of knowledge is lost between the two thighs of a woman. What he meant, in fact, in Arabic, I mean, in Arabic, mehbal, which is one of the words for a woman's private parts, means the place of stupidity, like the habal. Ahbal is somebody stupid. And so the idea of people that are in a lustful state, they've lost their intelligence and they're not thinking rationally. And that's why Islam guards and protects, because lust is important as a human phenomenon. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended that we procreate, and you can't do that without desire. But that desire has to be elevated, and it's elevated through marriage, through intimacy that involves care and concern for the two partners. That it's not simply onanistic. It's not simply pleasure for pleasure's sake. That there's a mutuality in the relationship. And so, I think what he's saying there is really that this is a way men go astray, and then, before it's like this amazing thing, and afterwards it's just a dream. All you have is a memory of something that it's like all pleasure, it's completely ephemeral. And just like, I mean, you can eat, it's amazing how people can consume food purely for pleasure, and then they have indigestion for hours afterwards. So they suffer because of this
desire,
temporary pleasure. Yeah. And lust is like that, because one of the things about ma'asiyah is always followed by remorse, and obedience is always followed by joy. So before a joy proposed, it's something, I'm going to get some pleasure out of this, it's going to be joyful. But afterwards, it's, no sooner had, it's despised straight. Like you have, and then it's, what was the person thinking? So he's really talking about that state of ma'asiyah. you know, which has always been a problem in Western culture, partly because of the mixing of men and women in ways that Islamic civilization did not encourage for that reason, because they did not want a breakdown of that relationship. And there's a very important book by Unwin, who was a professor at Cambridge. He wasn't a religious person. He was an anthropologist. He wrote it in 1934. It's called Sex and Culture. And what he shows in that book is that when sexual licentiousness is released into a culture, it'll destroy it within 3 generations.
Wow. And today's culture is all sexualized.
It's completely sexualized. And that's why they're not producing any high culture. There's no high art, because he shows how it's the sublimation of those appetites that allow for high culture to be produced. Once you fall into licentiousness, both gluttony and lust, you lose all of the higher desires for great poetry. I mean, who are the great poets today?
Rappers.
Who are the great novelists? Seriously, who are the great novelists? Because I mean, if you read the great novelists of Russia, where are the Dostoevskys? Where are the Tolstoys? Where are the Turgenevs? You know, where are the Rumis? Where are the Sadis? Where are the Hafiz? I mean, we had so many of those type people. Where are they now? So once this culture falls into appetites, there's not much left.
That's why the Prophet said, "Man yadman lima bain lihyihi wa ma bain fakhidhi yadman lahu al-jannah." If you can
exactly, and that's it. I mean, those are two. They're so important in the, and then, you know, I mean, Plato thought the circle was like the perfect form, and so the head is like a circle that God put on the body. And so the heart is like the will, the reason is here, the will is here, and then the appetite is the stomach and the genitals. So he put reason on top, and then he put, you know, the will to be guided by reason, and then the appetite to be guided by reason and will.
Wow.
So you know, once you invert that and put the stomach and the genitals, that's why Imam Ghazali wrote that beautiful book in the Ihya, Kasr al-Shahwatain, breaking the two desires. Because if you can control food and if you can control the genitals, all the other desires are easy to control, because those are primal urges.
And thus we have the fasting concept and so many things of taqwa, ghadb al-basar in our culture and our tradition.
Right. Well, also, I mean, now pornography is wreaking havoc on young people, and young men in particular, but apparently a third now of the viewers of these things are women. And I know it's a crisis in the Muslim community, because I've read the stats on it.
Shaykhuna, so I don't want to take it off the topic of poetry, but I really wanted to ask, while you were speaking about the rational aspect and the tarbiyah aspect of acceptance and obedience, I feel like this is a befitting question to someone like yourself, that when it comes to us as Muslims, there's always times where we're hoping to accept something, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And you've spoken quite a bit about this in different lectures, and even in Oxford Union speech, someone asked you a question that was similar to this, and you give them a powerful response. You can find it online. But where does it happen so that a person just accepts? Is that the will of accepting, or where does that come from, or is it?
Are you talking about accepting things that maybe you don't understand in our religion?
Correct.
No.
Well, I mean, it's called submission. You know, I mean, you know, they talk about the great resignation out there. We have to have the great resignation internally. There's things, I think there's going to be things in Islam and in any tradition, there's going to be things that will trouble you. In reading the books, you're going to come across things that trouble you. Some of those things are contextualized. So some of the rules about the ima in the books of fiqh that you've probably come across, I found them very troubling. But it's important to remember that the fuqaha are lawyers. I mean, I think people forget that. The fuqaha are lawyers.
Wow, yeah.
And not all of the fuqaha were deeply spiritual people. They had great fuqaha that were really, they were fuqaha, they were lawyers. So they find loopholes and they find things. I mean, I found, for instance, abortion, because I wrote a paper on abortion, and I want to expand it because abortion to me is a very important issue because it gets at the crux of the modern world. This idea that people can simply choose to eliminate something that God has initiated.
And you live in California, so you have the far liberals that are.
No. And abortion is really a very, never in the history of Islam has abortion been permitted anywhere in the Muslim world. And people say, oh, well, Imam Al-Ramli from the Shafi'i school, he permitted it. Well, why then do the Shafi'i countries outlaw it? Why is it outlawed in Malaysia? Because every madhab has shadh fatwas. Mm-hmm. There's no madhab that doesn't have shudud. Mm-hmm. And that's why traditionally you have to follow the mashhur of the madhab. What was the dominant opinion? You can't just pick and choose. Islam is not to pick and... If I cherry picked my religion, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted.
You can any of the drink, marijuana,
marijuana, pretty much fornicate, pretty much anything you wanted, because you'll find opinions for everything. But what is the normative tradition? And that's why it's very important for people to understand that. So Imam Al-Ramli, when I looked in that section, it was about Ima. He was talking about Ima. Somebody asked him about aborting a concubine's child. So that was the issue. It wasn't about free women. It was about Ima. And I found that consistent in the opinions that it was permitted. And I could, this idea, and most of them, even the few handful of people that did permit interrupting pregnancy, it was before 40 days, because there's a khilaf, as you all know. It's a weak opinion, but science substantiates the weaker opinion today. And that's what I wrote in my article on abortion, that the ruh comes in at around 40 days, not at 120 days. And I think there's a much stronger argument for that.
Sheikh Hamza, even, sorry, a weak opinion, but when you say, ثم يكون علقة مثل ذلك يكون نطفة مثل ذلك, and the scholars who have taken another multiple different sanads, that means all that equal to 40 days, not 4 months.
Exactly. That's the other opinion. And that opinion has been substantiated by modern embryology.
Yeah,
and
it wouldn't make sense. 4 months would not make sense at all.
Also, brain activity starts at about 40 days, which that to me is that consciousness, is that the beginning of consciousness entering into the fetus. And we know that from inception, life starts at inception. That's biological life. It's also a genetically unique individual. It's not the mother. It's a genetically unique individual. And Allah said, "Awalam takun nutfa." Weren't you a nutfa? Like He's saying you were a nutfa. He doesn't say, في مرحلة من مراحل تكوينكم.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
هناك مرحلة سميناها نطفة. No, it's you were a nutfa.
Sheikh, sorry, Mufti Rahman, go ahead. Sorry.
I want to. But you go ahead.
I was just saying the concept. فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. That concept today in secular world, in the modern world, that tasneem, the submission that what you started off with, it's so colluded, it's so compromised. And that's where Sheikh, sometimes people like you can answer some of these speculations at a higher level.
Well, people want to, today, modern people want to reformulate everything in their own image. So they want to look anachronistically at the past. So they're judging slaveholders for something that was completely acceptable 200 years ago. I mean, that just people did not see anything wrong with slavery. Very few people did. Right. So,
but the other concept, even with the Quran, there's just so much more.
You can't impose your sensibilities on previous peoples, you know. So it's very important that I would argue that I think Islam, one of the goals of Islam was to eliminate slavery, and I think the Muslims unfortunately didn't take it seriously enough. And slave traders were odious in Islamic history. They were not liked. Even in America, slave traders were considered the lowest of the low. Like they were really considered horrible human beings. So the slave trader was always odious even in the Roman, if you read the Roman histories, slave traders were always seen as very low people. But slavery was very much part of the pre-modern world. Islam, like many things, Islam is a tradition of tadrij. It tries to eliminate things slowly. But I actually think one of the wisdoms behind slavery was that it would reduce war casualties.
100%.
Because when people are fighting and they know that, you know, that they can gain booty from war captives, they'll I think more likely to try to capture them than to slaughter them.
I'm so sorry, Abdurrahman, you had a question. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that, you know, the question that Mufti Wahab asked, and I'm like growing up, I read and heard audio lectures of Sheikh Hamza. Don't you think, Sheikh, that one concept that is not being taught enough, which is the foundation of submission, is the fact that Islam is rooted in love, right? It's rooted in love for the Prophet ﷺ. It's rooted in love for Quran. And naturally, when you love somebody, like we love Sheikh Hamza. That's why whatever he says, you know, it's like that. It's like that, you know, that nowadays Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, you use that word murid and that Sheikh, and like anything that Sheikh says, it becomes like a beautiful thing, even though like 10,000 people are saying the same thing. But if you have love for somebody, that when that person speaks, it's easier to digest what that person is saying. And you know, Iqbal, you love Iqbal, Sheikh Hamza. He says something. He says a poem. He says, "Wo faqa kash ke maut se darta nahi zara, ruh Muhammad uske badan se nikal do." He says the man who famine racks ill fears no death. Like he's not afraid of poverty or anything. It doesn't scare him. That person, you can't defeat him. The only thing you can do is remove the spirit of Muhammad from his body. Right. Once you do that, then you've conquered him. And I think that spirit of Muhammad sallallahu has, once it's taken out from the person's body in the soul, then now, of course, now there's going to be questions and this and that.
No, I would totally agree with you. Love of the Prophet ﷺ is the hair of Samson in our religion. You know, Samson, his secret was in his hair. And once Delilah cut the hair, he lost all his power.
Wow. So if he went for Hajj, he was gone.
So love of the Prophet ﷺ is the hair of Samson of our faith.
But Jan, even the ayah after that, where you mentioned,
what did they say going into battle? Wa Muhammadah. You know, which really meant would that Muhammad was with us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sheikh, the ayah after that, Sheikh Abdullah mentions, وَلَوْ أَنَّا كَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَنِ اقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ أَوْ اخْرُجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ مَا فَعَلُوهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ مِنْهُمْ وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ فَعَلُوا مَا يُوعَظُونَ بِهِ لَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُمْ وَأَشَدَّ تَثْبِيتًا. Like, it would have actually been better if they did something that was as irrational as leaving their families and just, you know, leaving everything behind and just killing everything behind you. But even that, if it was said to us, we accept it. And so in our education system in America, or even in our systems of, you know, Masha, you have Zaytuna, or we have whatever institution that we're trying our best to follow on your footsteps. Where do we add that to? Is it just natural? Is it embedded, or is it supposed to be taught?
You know, love comes from from three sources, love of the Prophet ﷺ. One is knowing his seerah, knowing about him and who he was. And then also knowing about his beautiful qualities and characteristics. But then the third and really the most important is knowing what he did for you.
SubhanAllah.
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Prophet ﷺ, if you can imagine the Isra and the Mi'raj, if you can imagine, first of all, it said, Ma zagha al-basar ma tagha. You know, he's going through the heavens and seeing everything's being revealed to him, but he's not deviating. He's not looking. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, what's that? Oh, no, he's only thinking about God. He's not interested in all of the otherness. But then when he's there with God, what he couldn't say to God, I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. You know, to go back to the world and suffer the trials, travails, and tribulations of dunya.
Wow.
When you've reached the pinnacle of reality, there's nothing beyond that. You know, there's nothing beyond the lottery of the furthest limit.
How many times
even Jibril couldn't go. So he comes back, and you know, there's a great story about the three men in the desert who they're dying of thirst, and then they come up, there's the big walled rectangle in the middle of the desert. So the first one climbs up to the top, and then he just says Allahu Akbar and jumps over. And then the second one climbs up and he says Subhanallah, jumps over. And then the third one, he wants to see where his two companions have gone. So he climbs up and sees this beautiful oasis with water and date palms. It's this incredible garden in the middle of the desert. And just as he's about to jump, he says, maybe there's some other wayfarers out there in the desert that need to find this place. I should go look for them. And that's the task of the teacher. That they're more concerned once they have found that place. They're more concerned that others find it as well. And that's why the Prophet said, يَدْخُلُونَ عَلَيَّ رُوَادًا وَيَخْرُجُونَ أَدِلًّا. They come seeking, but they go out guides to what they've found. And so that's the great gift of just giving back what we found. Part of what, for me, you know, when I came back to the United States, you know, alhamdulillah, all I did was share this amazing thing that I found. And when I came back, I found people reading all these modernist books on Islam. And I'm like, how can you read that stuff when you've got all this? I mean, how can you read some 20th century pseudo-intellectual Muslim when you've got Fakhruddin al-Razi and Ahmed Zarruq and Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and Ibn Ajiba and all these amazing people? And I just wanted to share what I had discovered
in the desert. You discovered in the desert of Mauritania.
In Mauritania, yeah. Well, I discovered it in England, and then later in going to the Emirates and meeting the Mauritanian scholars there. But there were so many people like Imam, you know, like this book was not very well known. You know, so this is one of the books, the Tasir fi Ulum al-Tanzil by Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi. You know, this always was my go-to tafsir. So a lot of people use this now, but you know, these are treasures. They're treasures. I mean, Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, Imam Abu Hanifa said something so amazing when he said, if the kings knew the pleasure that we were in, they would come with their armies to try to take it from us.
Ibrahim ibn Adham used to say, لو يعلم الملوك ما عندنا لجادلونا بالسيوف.
Exactly, yeah.
وجاء الإمام شافعي سهري لتنقيح العلوم ألذ لي من وصل غانية ومن طيب عناقي. خلاص.
وتمايلي طربا لحل عويسة أحلى من مدامة الساقي وأبيت. Then he says at the end of the poem, وأبيت سهرا الدجى وتبيت يوما تبغي بعد ذلك لحاقي. I think Imam Hamza can translate this better because there's drums involved and there's alcohol involved.
Well, there's, one of the problems, and Nietzsche identified this, the German philosopher. One of the problems with human beings is that we have two ways of being in the world. People were wondering, like, because I started this book club, and one of the books that I wanted to read with people was a book by Jane Austen called Sense and Sensibility. They're like, why do you want to read Sense and Sensibility? But part of the reason is because that book, which is a beautiful book about two ways of being in the world, which is the way of sensibility, of feeling, of emotion, and the way of sense, of reason and logic. So you have these two wonderful characters, Marianne and Eleanor, and they're in the world in these two ways. But what Jane Austen is showing is that they're both important ways of being. There has to be a balance. And one of the beauties of our tradition, we have Mecca, which is ecstatic. It's feeling, it's powerful emotion. And then we have Medina. The Meccan verses are extraordinarily ecstatic verses about God and then you go to Medina, and it's coming into the city. It's how do we behave with one another? It's how do we, and the bridge between those is the Isra and the Mi'raj. It's going to Jerusalem and praying with all the previous dispensations, leading them in prayer, but then ascending into this ecstatic journey to the Lord Rabb al-Izzah. So Islam has Mecca and Medina. And it's this beautiful balance between these two ways. And that's why in Mecca all the men and women are mixed together, and it's all all that Medinan balance is really displaced in a way that's quite amazing for our religion. So it's all there. And so everybody's there's no differences here, because everybody's immersed in this ocean of bewilderment in Mecca. But then you go to Medina, and the prayer lines, who got there first? It's all order. So that what Nietzsche called Apollonian and Dionysian. The Dionysian was this ecstatic way of being in the world, and the Apollonian is this way of being in the world that's measured and law-based and controlled. So Islam beautifully bridges these two and welds them in a way that no other religion has done. And this is why, if you look at Christianity, it's a much more Dionysian faith, and then Judaism is a much more Apollonian faith. So the Christians, the tendency that they have is to become ecstatic and lose their way. So Allah calls them Balin. And the other way is that way of law-based, whereas in Islam we have this wonderful in some of the traditions of the Qawm, they talk about mujdub salik, this idea of inward ecstasy and outward sobriety. And so in our culture today, you have this Dionysian madness where everybody, there's no Apollonian measurement. There's reason is being thrown out, and it's just the rave party. The Burning Man is the great expression of that madness. That's a very unhealthy sign. And there's a great play by Euripides called The Bacchae, which directly deals with this problem. So Islam has this incredible balance. So the Sufis have a tendency to become too Dionysian. That's when they go astray. But generally, the Sufis were extremely sober. And one of the problems with modern Islam is they think that this kind of Sufism of the tombs and all these, you know, wild ripping the things and screaming and having all that, the Sufis were scholars generally, and they were the most scrupulous in their adherence to the Sharia. They were people that really hated bid'ah. And that's why very early on they were already saying there's no Sufis left. I mean, Imam al-Qushayri is saying this already.
Wow.
In the Risala. So where are we today? I mean, I have a book by Ahmed Zarruq, which is a commentary on Ibn Bannat Saraqusti's famous didactic poem on the rules of tasawwuf. And he has the last chapter is the Sufis of our day. And he just talks about how they're all astray.
Wow. But there's some scholars them leaving us. قد مات قوم وما ماتت مكارمهم وعاش قوم وهم في الناس أموات. And then there's some scholars that were scholars of the soul, the scholars of the heart, the scholars of knowledge, insight, farsight, basira. They left us, and they don't only decorate your library, but they fill your hearts. Their impression is not just in speech, but in body. And that's what that reform. I'm not calling for, and no one's calling for a reform. I don't want to take this out of context, but that self-reform is needed so much in our society because of this distraction and this delusion that we're living in. And may Allah give us that. And that's why having these discourses with people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, it not only does it make you think twice, it challenges your trajectory. Where are you going? What are you doing with this knowledge? How much have you contemplated about this? And Sheikh, everything you said requires a pen and pages to be written. There's so much that could be delve into. But Mufti Rahman, you were saying something. I don't want to cut you, Mufti.
Sheikh, you know, this whole conversation started with the idea of the foundation is, of course, the love for the Prophet ﷺ. Now, I remember once you mentioned this, and you're probably thinking, "What's wrong with you? You're always quoting me." I'm not doing it intentionally, Sheikh. It's just that, you know, growing up, I never knew Urdu and never knew Arabic growing up, so we read a lot of your speeches. And you mentioned one thing a long time ago, and I kept on thinking about it. And I think when I just went for Khuruj Tabligh to Pakistan for 40 days with 22 people from Michigan, and we came back.
As you can tell by his big turban, Sheikh.
So, and I spoke about you to Sheikh Tariq Jamil. You know, we were talking there, and we spoke while we were there. And while I was sitting in the Turkey airport, while we were reading a book together with other people, and there was extensive hadith and narrations about al-mawalat fillah, like loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one after the other, like so much. And it struck to me that why is there so much emphasis on loving each other so much? And your words echoed in my ear that today we have lost the capacity of even loving. That's why we can't even love the Prophet ﷺ. So if we have a hard time loving the one in front of us, who's doing good for us, who's taking care of us, who's like the person right in front of you, so how can you love someone in his absence, which is the Prophet ﷺ? So if once you start loving people around you that do good for you and that are nice to you, and then you start loving them, you start caring for them, what's slowly going to happen is your love for the Prophet will increase. And it goes from man lam yushkir nas lam yushkirillah. And that's what I started thinking, that's why there's so much. I read a statement, haqiqatul muhabba la tazidu bil birri wa la tanqusu bil jafa. And I could not understand, like the essence of muhabba, love, by Imam Makhul, says, is that it does not increase with someone doing good to you, nor does it increase if someone gives you a cold shoulder, because you've reached that essence of love now. It doesn't decrease.
Yeah, and that's very important that you point that out about essence, because the Prophet ﷺ, the reason he's Rahmal al-Alameen is because he saw the essence of things. he didn't see, he wasn't lost as most people are in al-hakam al-takathur. This, which could, one of the meanings of that, I mean, obviously the meaning yatakatharuna ala al-amwal and things like that, but one of the meanings is that takathur, this multiplicity, has you bedazzled.
Oh my God.
And so حتى زرتم المقابر, when you visit the grave, all of that waham, ما قادك شيء مثل الوهم, you know, as Ibn Ata'illah says, nothing will lead you on more than your own delusion. So people, when they don't see the essence of things, they're caught in the outward illusion of it. If they listen to the dictates of Iblis, then they become deluded about them. So it moves from an illusion to a delusion. And Iblis is called the gharur, right? Allah tells us not to be deluded by the deluder, because he will delude you. And one of the things he'll delude you about is about human beings. He'll convince you that not only you're bad, but human beings are bad. That he'll create, one of the things now about this whole thing about racism, you know, that people are just racists. People aren't racists. People to say that is to create despair in people.
Well, yeah.
And it's not true. In fact, many people have fought against tribalism. The Prophet ﷺ came to take these things out of the world, to get to the essence of things. And so when you see each human being as a creation of Allah, you begin to love that creation of God. And you can even love the most odious of God's creation in a way that enables you to see the gift and the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that creation, that Allah has created it. So everything has a purpose. Even the worst of people on this planet have a purpose. There's nothing, Allah didn't create anything without purpose. And so once you see that everything has purpose, everything has meaning, it becomes an enriching experience, and it doesn't limit you. And that's why you can even handle people abusing you. And it's not like we're not masochists. If we can prevent people from abusing us, we should.
Yeah.
And that's why self-defense is not only a Islamic right, it's a fundamental human right. But if you're in a situation where somebody's abusing you, the people that really are with God know that this is a tribulation from God. I mean, one of my favorite chapters in the Quran is Surah Ibrahim.
Wow.
That chapter, every time I come to that chapter, you know, on just moving through the Quran, I get excited every time because I love that chapter. There's just that chapter, you know, I had this kind of realization of the perfection of that chapter in a way that I hadn't realized in other parts of the Quran, but I really saw, and same with قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ also, which it was, I don't know how you know, do you read with the lunar moon? Do you read with the lunar calendar?
No.
In Morocco, they have this nice tradition where you read based on the lunar calendar. So you begin the khatam on the first day of the lunar month. So you always know what juz you're in, you know what day it is.
Subhanallah.
So like tonight's the 18th night because it's the 18th juz.
Sheikh, we even us Deobandis are going calculation mode now.
I know, I'm disappointed with you.
I'm just we're not gonna have you holding that flag by yourself. We're gonna be right by you.
I know. Well, I call the people like Imam Tahir neo-bandis.
No, we're not gonna let you down on that. You're not gonna. Imam Sheikh Hamza has a book on calculation and the lunar and.
It was a strong argument. Like I always ask people, did you really read it?
Did you really read it?
Yeah.
No, I just saw it on Amazon. I didn't even read it.
Because I asked one Imam, I won't say who it is because you'd know him. because he was saying, no, calculations. And I said, did you read my book? He said, yeah, I read your book. I said, did you read it? He said, yeah. About 6 months later, he called me up. We need to talk to ISNA. I said, what? He said, they need to stop calculation. I said, well, why are you saying that? He said, I just finished your book.
You read the back of it. You read the back of it.
I have a funny story about a book of yours. So like one of our, once, one like so-called internet student, we knew him, like, he just learns online, the Google guy. So he gave a khutbah somewhere, and he basically wrote down your khutbah, and he was basically saying what you said, right?
That's dangerous. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. You could get kicked off the stage or loved by many.
Okay, so it's fine if you do that, but you recommended a book in that speech. So he basically quoted you, and he's not saying your name. He's saying, yeah, so I read this book, and it's an amazing book, and you guys should read this book, right? So one person who is a friend of mine, he says he's a professor at this university. He says, I go up to him, I say, man, I'm amazed that you're a young man and you've come across this book. The kid didn't realize that the book you're referencing was a college textbook, not just a regular book. So he said, so what do you like about the book? So he's like, because he's saying, I read this book, and he said, oh yeah, it's a good book. And he says, do you it's a textbook, right? It's not like a book. Have you even seen this book before? And he says, no, I haven't seen it, but I've heard. So he said, why are you saying this in your khutbah? So Sheikh Hamza, I'm sure people are there's no copywriting in Deen, but I think they should at least acknowledge that someone else is saying, I read this book and you should read this book. So the same thing with the lunar book of yours. My brother, he knows the titles of all books and the author. And he knows how
Which brother?
My older brother, Shahidullah. He knows the title. Yeah, he knows the title, the author, and the color. He has this book. I have this book right here, From Good to Great by Carl.
I actually had that. Yeah.
All right, so
So he's reading that, and I'm reading this.
So he doesn't.
I'm glad you guys are reading. Those are important things.
Sheikh, what do you think? We only read Hayat al-Sahaba and Fadail al-Amal? I mean,
Fadail al-Amal is a great little work. And I've always felt it should be retypeset and published properly because it's.
You should do it. Sheikh, you should do it.
Every once in a while, I actually look at that book, and the hadiths in there are so beautiful. There's so many wonderful treasures in that book.
Sheikh, you should do it.
I don't know if you guys know this, but Dr. Winter, myself, and I think Dr. Omar Abdullah Farouk as well. I first went through Jama'at Tabligh. We went out with them, and I benefited a lot. And that book.
How many days did you go, Sheikh?
I never did like the 4 months, but
you don't need to. You have a certificate. You're good.
I know my 4 months, but I've done so much traveling that I think
it counts.
Fulfilled the requirement.
You don't get their badge yet.
That book is a wonderful book.
Really I mean, I think it's been so long. Most people probably don't even know the entire story. I know it's late, Majan and Musulman. I think Shimla has to go. But you started becoming Muslim, Majan.
Sheikh Hamza is 3 hours back.
I know, but don't hold him too long, Majan. Sheikh, if it was up to us, we would have you for the next forever, right? But just a few rapid fire questions because Sheikh was rubbing his eyes. He's probably tired of us. He's like, these brothers are on here for too long and talking too much. But Sheikh, you already answered the first one. My question is going to be the favorite surah. It's Surah Ibrahim, right?
No, my favorite surah is whichever one I'm reading. But I do love I love that surah. Oh, what I was going to say about it is that one of the most powerful verses in there is about Moses telling them, when he reminds them about, and then it says that that Pharaoh, what he did to them, يذبح أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم يذبحون أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم وفي ذلكم بلاء من ربكم عظيم. It's a reminder that was not Pharaoh. That was a tribulation from your Lord. Wow. And people forget that, they just forget everything's from God. Even Pharaoh. People just forget that.
It becomes easier to deal with when you have that understanding. Then you don't become blameworthy. Like, you don't start blaming God for situations. Then you start looking at each situation as a learning process.
It's a
getting closer.
learning, exactly. And it's all from God. And once you see that, that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he was always in that mode. You know, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. He was in that mode of just seeing everything as from his Lord. All of the tribulation. And that's why, you know, my favorite dua is the dua of Ta'if. When he comes out of Ta'if and says that amazing dua, you know, إِلَى مَنْ تَكِلُنِي إِلَى عَدُوٍ يَتَجَهَّمُنِي. You know,
that dua is painful, Sheikh. If you start that dua tafsir,
it's an incredible dua. And but he said, you know, إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ غَضَبُكَ عَلَيَّ فَلَا أُبَالِي. You know, as long as you're not upset with me, I don't mind if you want to send these people to torture me and punish me. If it's from you, and that's Hajar, when she says to Ibrahim, when he's leaving her in the middle of the desert, abandoning, like in modern terms, it would be like a husband abandoning his wife and child in the middle of the desert. And she asks him, "Is this from your Lord?" And he says, "Yes." Then she it's good.
Sheikh Abdul Wahab, I mean, this session has been way too overwhelming for me. I'm enjoying this so much, Sheikh. If you ask me, I will have you all night, Sheikh Hamza. And alhamdulillah, we have you as a scholar, mentor, and leader for our community.
We do want Sheikh Hamza to accept an invite again next time, or else
I don't think he is, because we took so long. So just ask him all the questions now. No. Mufti Abdul Wahab, go ahead.
I was just gonna. I mean, I think I want to allow Sheikh Hamza for a few moments before he leaves, just to tell us about how Zaytuna came about, and what is the next. What is his Sheikh? Wallahi, one of my personal pet peeve questions is, what's your next ambition? What's your next plan, or is what's the next plan for your college?
Well, I mean, obviously, you all are running an academy, so you know that funds are very important. So just an endowment's really important. So in terms of my role as president, I'm hoping in whatever time I have left in that position, to secure a good endowment for the college. And then we have projects there that we're working on. But my real interest is in creating a K through 12 curriculum for Muslim schools.
Wow.
Because the Muslim schools are generally substandard. And I think we have an immense opportunity. I was saying back in the 90s that I don't consider it permissible to send Muslim children to non-Muslim schools. And that's Imam Malik said that. Yusuf Nabahani has a fatwa 100 years ago about tahrim ba'ath awlad al-muslimin ila madaris al-nasara. Can't remember what he called it. But now with the critical theory, with neo-Marxist ideas that have completely infiltrated education, even at the lower levels. So they're getting these things now in middle school and high school, and certainly in college. So if Muslims go through college, they're going to come out thinking socialism is the answer to all the world's problems. And we have many scholars wrote against socialism in the Muslim world 100 years ago. I have a book hold on.
Like, I'm going to ask Sheikh Hamza to just grab a book one by one.
Bajan, just relax, okay? Don't say too much.
Don't give me more books. He's gonna be hard for
I know it's the only book you got on your bookshelf right now.
Brother, man, I'll pull up books right and left. Got books in my pocket. Islam versus socialism. Wow.
This is actually a really good little book, but it was published in Lahore by that Sheikh Muhammad Ashraf, but it's by Mirza Muhammad Hussain, and it's really good. I mean, I read this pretty thoroughly, a couple of times. Yeah.
You can see you underlined the whole book, Sheikh.
Yeah, no, I gave it a good read, but it's a very useful little book because it shows you how, when these ideas showed up, how Muslims looked at them.
When was this book written, Sheikh?
He wrote it first published 1947.
Wow.
So he's got the human situation, war on wage slavery, private ownership and social welfare, balanced society, economics and religion, the golden calf. And then, it's very interesting.
Sheikh, you see us three right here.
So Sheikh, you definitely read the first 5,000 years of debt, that book.
I have that, yeah.
How was that?
That's an important book. I mean,
Yeah, Sheikh, you don't have keep standing.
Camera.
These are my economic books.
Okay.
So here's the first 5,000.
You're gonna have to slow down on us. There you go.
Yeah.
But then I'm sure you never read it. You just heard the title somewhere and you just asked.
This is a really good book here. Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics.
How about Islam and economics in the West? Do you have something on that?
This is all Islam and economics. This whole shelf.
Subhanallah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's all Marxism and anyway. So
how do you build the appetite to read more and more? Like how does that happen? You just start reading and you.
Well, I mean, I have certain interests. So economics is one of my interests. Law, obviously, philosophy, ethics, moral philosophy is very important. Political philosophy is important. Medicine's an interest of mine, and mathematics is an interest. So those are the areas.
You mentioned all the subjects. You didn't leave anything. It's like saying.
It's like asking Michael Jordan, "What's your weakness?"
No. I mean, some of the things I'm a real dilettante in them, but they interest me. And then other things, I think, I've done serious education. I mean, I have a lot of books on education.
In education, Sheikh, if we're part of schools and trying to learn like yourself, what would be one book you would tell us to read?
Nokestein is really good. The Mehdi Nokestein on the Islamic origins of Western education. A very good book. Also, George Makdisi, The Rise of Colleges, very important. And then there's some really good books on liberal arts. One of the most important ones, I think, is Mark Van Doren's book called Liberal Education. There's a good book that the Mormons published on Islamic treatises on education.
Wow.
So you all can read Arabic. So Muhammad ibn Sahnun's book is very important on education. Tarbiyat al-Subyan is really important. And I think that's been translated into English as well. Obviously, Imam al-Ghazali on education. There's a good book on Ghazali's theory of education, which brings out all, because he didn't write anything specific, but he has a lot of educational theory throughout his works. So there's a lot to gain there. And he really understood Tarbiyat al-Awlad, Imam al-Ghazali. I mean, he has some really good advice about Tarbiyat al-Awlad.
Sheikh, normally people ask, but let me ask one question, Sheikh. Normally people ask.
Sheikh Hamza doesn't have time for TV. He doesn't watch movies, and he doesn't. Do you play golf, Sheikh?
My dad was on the Columbia University golf team, so my dad was a great golfer, and my dad actually, I got golf lessons when I was young, I was actually a very good golfer. But when I became Muslim, I gave up golfing. I've played about 4 times. There's a lot of Muslims golf, so I have played about 4 or 5 times since I became Muslim, and I was always surprised that I actually did relatively well, because I learned it very young, and I was a good golfer when I was in high school.
So what is your interest outside of like the mabah, like the things that are mabah, like hobbies and stuff like that? Because I mean, I'm sure like we're into sports, so we spend a lot of time playing ice hockey and playing basketball, and it takes away from what we're doing.
Yeah,
but it gives energy,
I mean, those are really good sports. I like. I mean, I obviously probably my biggest. But I try to walk every day. And I go for long walks. You can think a lot when you're walking. And I listen to a lot of lectures.
Is that us? You stuck between that, Sheikh?
So
I think we have to thank Sheikh for the time that he's taken out. So much time he's taken out of his precious schedule.
Hawking is a scholar.
I think we just got Sheikh Hamza froze. You know what Sheikh Hamza is trying to tell us indirectly, that you took all my evening.
Yeah, I want to share just this link right here that Zaytuna, the team, very nicely put together for us. May Allah reward Sister Aisha Subhani, the Vice President of Zaytuna, for putting this together and setting it up for us. And I think I've been in contact with her for 1 year, just trying to have Sheikh join us. And I asked them, if rather than asking Sheikh all the details about Zaytuna and the great work they're doing, we rather just join a call with the team and they can explain to us on a separate call. So we've shared a link, and this link pretty much summarizes, inshallah, will be a live session with the Zaytuna team where they will talk about their institution and the details of what they do and how they run their college and the differences between their curriculum and all other curriculums that are out there right now. I will be on the call myself, and I encourage everyone to join the call. We have more than 1,400 people watching right now. Please try to join the call. It's a free session that they're going to have in regards to Zaytuna curriculum. Also, Bijan, before we leave, I really wanted just to share this video. I really enjoyed this video that Zaytuna made, and I wanted to share this if we have a second, just to watch one of their trailers on what they do.
Sheikh Hamza is back. Okay, we can, yeah.
Sorry, Sheikh. I'll share the trailer later. I apologize.
May Allah bless all of you and increase you and protect your organization. Inshallah, give you lots of openings. Alhamdulillah.
So, Sheikh, we're going to come see you in the Bay Area if Allah allows us and you give us permission, inshallah, very soon, inshallah.
Marhaban. Welcome. Come see the school, inshallah.
We will. Inshallah, we will. Inshallah, we will. Sheikh, we're honored to have you again. We apologize if anything we took you beyond the time. Really apologize, Sheikh. When you have all three of us on one screen and you have yourself, you are our teacher. So whenever our teacher comes, we just send so many questions his way. And so if there was any disrespect in that, we do apologize. But it was an honor for us to have you with us. Inshallah, we'll see you in person soon. And it would be an honor for us if you can actually visit our campus and see our students, inshallah, one day as well.
مرحبا السلام عليكم استودعكم الله السلام عليكم
ورحمة الله وبركاته شيخ.
I'm going to share the video, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, if you can share the video.
Bismillah.
Is there audio to this?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe the audio doesn't share through StreamYard, so I'm actually going to copy the link and put it here. So inshallah, everyone can, if you haven't got a chance to go to Zaytuna's YouTube page or their Facebook page, go ahead, please check it out, inshallah. I put the link on the bottom, and you can just definitely press the link, watch the video. join the Zoom call that I shared that link above as well. Inshallah, I think people will really benefit from it, and you will enjoy what Zaytuna is doing. Inshallah, hopefully in the future we can have more future sessions with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and perhaps collaborations with Zaytuna if Allah allows.
For Mufti Rahman to join us, can be someone like Hamza Yusuf on screen. So we'll have to do that again.
Yeah, I think your internet's a little disconnected, but we were only able to get Mufti Rahman to join because Sheikh Hamza was on, or else he doesn't join us.
I just gotta say one thing, Bajan. Like all those, like when you start throwing those book names out there, you stop writing and I think you already read all those books. Like you already got them down.
I have them. I wrote them down.
One of the things I learned is that when an elder is speaking, is not to write because you want to give the elder respect. And I wanted to write. I have a pad right here, and I could take the notes.
No, you're right, but it's a skill, not to make him feel like you're not listening to him.
Yeah, because I didn't want to look down and write when Sheikh was speaking. So this stuff is already.
But I gotta tell you something. But Alhamdulillah, like like you made him laugh. That's I gotta give it to you about that.
I wasn't trying to make him laugh. It's just natural.
You're natural.
All natural.
No, it was such an honor to have him on our Miftah page, and getting to know him at a personal level. Him getting up and showing us his library was a highlight for me. I don't think he would do that for someone.
The thing is, like, people. I mean, of course, when we were growing up for ourselves, like people that were like wholly knowledgeable, they're like untouchables. It's hard to know who they are. You just sort of move away from them, and like, oh, this is hard to get. I think what you guys, I'm not saying Miftah, but what we have done is like we made knowledge more accessible, and like people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. I'll tell you something. All the guys are watching today, like. I mean, if you aspire to get anything in life, like if it's a sincere approach, and you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will make things easy for you. We always wanted to benefit from Sheikh Hamza, see him, talk to him. And it seemed like it's going to be something, when we were growing up, impossible. Like we were hearing him from an audio tape or like a CD.
No, we're not that old. We're listening to audio tapes. I mean, you can't audios.
No, yeah, I'm 23 years old, so.
We saw videos too. But no, really, but I feel like, first of all, I want to thank the Zaytuna team, Sister Aisha, the Vice President. I think literally I've never been so persistent and stubborn for a speaker in my life like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. And I appreciate that she was able to handle my stubbornness and persistence. And throughout the 1 year, or actually more than 1 year, Allah reward her, bless her team. Really, inshallah, hopefully this is the beginning of something. I'm not saying we're going to have him on more often, but if Allah allows, the beginning of something more, that we're able to have him on more and more. And until then, inshallah, blessed with Sheikh Abdullah and Mufti Rahman. You guys share enough wisdom as well.
Honestly, I was telling Mufti Abdul Wahab that I was more excited having Sheikh Hamza on tonight for Miftah than Khabib joining us in person on Tuesday. Like, I know Khabib is a great MMA fighter, UFC champion, but he's a champion. He's a great icon. But like, for us students of knowledge, we really benefit from people like Sheikh Hamza and these scholars. Much.
Allah keep him healthy. Allah keep him healthy and give him a long life.
Barak on his life and his health.
But when you said that, you remind me of Khabib. So I'm share the link over here. We have online seats available. From wherever you're watching, please join us, inshallah. It's only a few days away. Inshallah on Tuesday. Please make dua for the event, and if that goes smooth, inshallah, people benefit from that event as well. And if you're in Michigan, I think maybe a few 50, 60 seats are left. Inshallah, you're able to join, bring your family, your friends. We want to, inshallah, show Khabib also, our institution, our attendees, our students, and inshallah, allow him to keep coming back again and again too, if possible. Allah bless you all, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Bajan. Inshallah, call it a night.
I can't thank you enough for organizing the collaboration with Zaytuna and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Sister Aisha. May Allah bless her and her family, and Sheikh Hamza and his family. And may Allah put so much more barakah and benefit to the ummah through Zaytuna Institute and Miftah Institute, Mufti Abdul Rahman. All audience that joined us tonight, may Allah bless you guys all, accept all your du'as, and increase you in knowledge and in action, and save us from the trials of this world and akhirah.
And also, before we leave, inshallah, that link that we shared about the Zaytuna orientation, inshallah, if anyone wants to share it with their family and friends, feel free to share it with other people as well. Jazakallah khair. I just shared the link for the Tuesday program. It's miftah.org/Khabib. Inshallah, please check it out and share with your family and friends, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.